I'm Jolene Wynn, and this is the Porn Addict's Wife podcast, episode number 160, How to Handle Triggering Situations. I used to think of myself as the wife of a porn addict, but I do not think of myself that way anymore, and you don't have to either. In this podcast, I am going to teach you how to manage your mind and your emotions so that you can stop living your life around your husband's pornography addiction. I am going to teach you how to stop being the victim and how to conquer his pornography addiction, even if he never does. I'm Jolene Wynn. I am a certified life coach, and I am a member of the LDS faith and the wife of a former porn addict. And this is a podcast for the Porn Addict's Wife. Hello, my ladies. How are you? I am very excited to talk to you guys today. I wanted to let you know, if you guys haven't already listened to previous episodes, I have a couple of episodes that I've already talked about triggers. And one of them is episode 112 called Triggers. And then one of them was a bonus podcast episode that is not numbered, and I wish it was, but if you scroll back through, you can just look at the titles. It is a bonus episode that I did with Rob. So it's called Conversations with Rob, Triggers and Temptations. And if you want, you guys can go back and listen to those before you listen to this one, or after. If you are just looking for more about triggers, then those are really good ones. And I just was back and looking through those as I was preparing for this podcast episode and wanted to let you guys know about it. So I wanted to talk about triggers today because 'tis the season. Do you guys feel that way? I know my clients do. I have been coaching so much inside my coaching program about going to the beach and going on vacations and wearing swimsuits and being around other people who are wearing swimsuits. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm doing my How to Not Hate Your Body masterclass in my coaching program this month. So you can come join us. That'll be the last week of June, and you can come join us inside my coaching program to join that class, because that's part of it. But then part of it is, what do I do? How do I handle triggering situations, when I'm at the lake with my family and there's other women there in swimsuits. And it's not just that there are other women in there in swimsuits. We're not worried about the grandmas that are chubbier than we are, right? Our brain is worried about the women that we think are more attractive. And we're worried that our husband will also find them attractive, or that he might then be more inclined to relapse. Okay, I'm not talking about his triggers right now. We're talking about yours. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, is how to handle these situations. So I'm going to go through today and I'm going to talk about some mistakes that we make and then what to do instead to help you in these situations. So whatever those are for you. Now, before we dive into that, I want you to think about if you want to identify, if you're not sure what your triggering situations are, you might know some of them. You might be like, oh yeah, this is for sure a triggering situation for me. But if you're not sure, if you're like, well, I don't know what my triggering situations are, then I just want you to ask yourself, are there situations where you're uncomfortable with your husband, or even just yourself? He doesn't even have to be there. Are there situations that bring up a lot of anxiety for you about your husband and what he's looking at? Is there a situation that brings up a lot of insecurity about it? Does this make sense? So for a lot of my clients, again, it's going to the beach. This used to be me. I used to feel very triggered. I hate this word, ladies, but I used to feel very anxious about going to the beach, going on a vacation where there would be other women in their swimsuits. Okay. That was something that concerned me. I have had many clients who are nervous about going to the gym, or nervous about their husband going to the gym. That's a potentially triggering situation or circumstance. It could be that you feel uncomfortable meeting new people with your husband, because you're not sure what he'll think of other women, right? Meeting new other women, right? And so just think about, okay, what am I concerned about? Where are situations that I feel uncomfortable, or it brings up a lot of self-doubt? Then that might be a potentially triggering situation. So just keep that in mind as we go through today, okay? All right, so number one, I want to talk about the mistakes that I often see, and I've made all of these as well, and that's why I know them so well. The mistakes that we often make in potentially triggering situations, okay? The first thing that I see is when we anticipate triggers, okay? When you are always on the lookout, it's like you have a BOLO off in your brain. Do you guys know what BOLO stands for? It means be on the lookout. Did you guys know this? I don't even know when. It took me, it was, embarrassingly recently that I learned that. Okay. So like police, they're like, put a BOLO out. It means be on the lookout. Okay. So that's basically what you're doing. You're telling your brain, we have a standing BOLO for whatever it is that makes you feel insecure. Women that are wearing immodest clothing. That's a huge one for so many of my clients, okay? Or women that are more attractive than we are, right? Our brain is like always on high alert. We have this BOLO on always, okay? And most of this, again, is subconscious. We don't realize that we're doing this, but when you have that going on in the background, when you have a subconscious BOLO out in your brain, then your brain is always going to be looking for triggers. And guess what, ladies? Because of confirmation bias, whatever you look for, your brain will find. So if you tell your brain to always be on the lookout, it's always going to find a trigger. So you will always be triggered, thus confirming the idea that you are just walking around always being triggered. Okay? Do you guys see what I'm saying? So when you anticipate triggers, when you say, oh my goodness, we're going to go to I don't even know, I just run into these all the time. When you're subconsciously generating an alarm inside of you, then it's going to always find something to be alarmed about. Okay? Now, the way to combat this, what I'm going to go in a little while. Okay? So I'm just going to do the mistakes we do first, and then I'll tell you guys what to do about them. Okay? One of the other mistakes that I often see is predictive texting. That's what I call it, okay? It's like we write the script. When we think that we are going into a triggering situation, we say, okay, I have a beach trip coming up, or I'm gonna go out to dinner with my husband, and that's usually a situation, or I'm gonna go dancing with my husband, and that's a situation that's triggering for me. When we have that kind of situation coming up, we know what's gonna happen. Our brain wants to play it out ahead of time. Our brain wants to predictive text. Okay, it wants to write the script. And here's what that looks like. It looks like this. It's like when you say, oh my gosh, we're going to go out tonight, and I just know that there's going to be an attractive woman, because there always is. What if an attractive waitress gets assigned to our table? Then I'm just going to be so insecure the whole night long, because every time he looks at her, he's going to be thinking how beautiful she is, and I'm just going to be wondering what he's thinking about. I'm not even going to be able to focus on the conversation. I'm not going to be able to relax. I'm not going to be able to have a good time. I'm just going to be so anxious the entire time, and the night is going to be terrible. And when you think that, it's kind of like writing a script for a play. That's what your brain is doing. It's saying, I'm going to think all of these things, and I'm going to feel all of these things, and here's how it's going to go. And that's just your brain writing a script for yourself. And so what happens when you write that script, then your brain is going to follow it. Just like a play, it's going to follow it. It's like, oh, okay, so then you're going to get there. And even if you wouldn't have even thought about the waitress beforehand, now you're on alert, right? Just like you always have been. Your BOLO is on. You see the potentially triggering situation. You're like, oh my gosh, yes, she is attractive. And then your brain is going to be on the lookout for every time your husband looks at the waitress, even if it's taking his order. And your brain is going to be your brain isn't going to relax, and you're going to feel insecure because you have decided ahead of time that that's what's going to happen, and your brain will create it. Okay? It's predictive texting or writing a script for a play. And if you do that ahead of time, then that's exactly what your brain is going to follow. You will end up creating the very scenario that you don't want to have happen unintentionally. Okay? That's one of the biggest mistakes that I see. Okay? Now, the third thing that I see, one of the biggest mistakes, is we get defensive in advance. Okay? Now, this is all driven because of a self-protection mechanism. Okay, our brain wants to keep us safe, and so it says, okay, we might have this potentially triggering situation coming up, and it wants to avoid the negative emotion that it thinks it's going to feel. So what it does is it gets defensive in advance. That might look like anger, it might look like frustration, it might look like defensiveness, it might look like apathy, it might look like indifference, it might look like annoyance. Like, all of us have a different emotion that will come up, but the reaction is a self-defense mechanism. Your brain says, this thing is going to cause us negative emotion. I don't even want to go. Okay, I think we should avoid it. It's going to want to put our walls up. It's going to want to get defensive about it in advance. And we inadvertently end up creating more negative emotion in an attempt to avoid negative emotion. Okay, and what this looks like is, okay, I'm getting ready for the beach. And even as I'm getting ready, I'm getting defensive in advance, thinking things like, man, this is going to be so terrible. I am so annoyed about all of this, and this wouldn't even be a problem. And I wouldn't have had to deal with this if my husband just could keep himself together and just get over all of his problems, because now it's my problem and I have to deal with it. So it's like we have this triggering situation that we think is going to be triggering maybe tomorrow when we go to the beach, but instead of just letting it be tomorrow at the beach, now we've brought it into right now, and we are getting defensive about it in advance. Do you guys see this? So not only do we have the triggering situation that's happening tomorrow, or potentially, we're actually creating more negative emotion just in anticipation of that triggering event. Does that make sense? You guys with me? Okay, so if any of those sound familiar, and there are so many mistakes that we make, and that's totally fine. Again, none of this is a problem. It's just the way that your brain is wired, and it's just important to become aware of if you want to change it. If you don't want to change it, just stop listening. Totally fine. Okay, I won't be offended. But if you want to change it, if you want to work on it, then let me give you some tips today to help you handle it. Okay, so we went over the biggest mistakes, and now I'm going to help you see what you can do instead. The first thing that you can do when you're going into triggering situations is leave space for the unknown, okay? As I was saying earlier, this is the opposite of what I was saying, right? The biggest mistake that we make, or one of the biggest, is that we anticipate it. We kind of write it out ahead of time. But the truth is, ladies, you can't predict the future. Did you know this? Sometimes my clients like to pretend that they can. And they'll tell me things like, oh, and it's just going to go like this, and then he's going to be thinking this, and I'm going to be like this the whole time, and I'm just going to feel this way, and when I feel this way, I do this thing, and it's all going to go down like so. And I think that is amazing. That's why I tell them, I'm like, that's amazing. You can predict the future. Did you know this? That's exactly what you just did. Ladies, you can't predict the future. So leave space for the unknown. Remind your brain of that when it happens, because your brain is going to want to go there. Your brain's going to want to go to that predictive texting and writing the script, and it's going to want to anticipate the trigger and always be on the lookout. And this is when you remind your brain. This is your opportunity to be in charge of your brain, and you say, oh, except that I don't actually know that that's how it's going to happen. So when you notice your brain going down that path, when you notice yourself in that spin of thoughts that are predicting the future, then I want to encourage you to be in charge of your brain, and you can even just say, stop. It's one of the best things you can do. Say stop to your brain. Put a stop to those thoughts and remind your brain that you can't predict the future and you don't actually know what's going to happen. And then leave space and be open to any emotion. You can even tell yourself, you know what? I don't actually know what I'm going to feel. I don't actually know what I'm going to think. And you just remind your brain of that it doesn't need to predict it, that it doesn't actually know. That's number one. Then the second thing that you can do is don't use your past to predict your future. Your past is irrelevant, ladies. Not because it's unimportant, not because you're not affected by it. It's irrelevant in that it doesn't need to create the future. When we use our past as a way to reference how we should behave, we end up creating more of what has already happened. You guys with me? Your brain only has your past for a reference. So it makes sense that your brain is going to use your past in order to try to predict the outcome of a certain situation. So it's going to want to say things like, well, the last time we went to the beach, or the last time we went to my husband's Christmas party, yada, yada, yada. Okay? This is when you give your brain the opportunity, you stop your brain. Again, you can just say, stop. My past is irrelevant. Just because it happened like that before doesn't mean it's going to happen like that again. It's kind of, again, goes hand in hand with leaving space for what could happen, not predicting it in advance. You guys with me? Just because it happened like that before does not mean it has to happen like that again. Your past only repeats itself when you allow it to. Even if the circumstance is the same, even if your husband relapses the same, your past does not have to repeat in the same way because you can change how you respond. So even if you repeat a circumstance, the whole scenario of the past does not necessarily have to repeat. Even if you feel the same emotions about your husband relapsing, you can handle it in a different way. Okay? Just because it happened like that before doesn't mean it has to happen like that again. Your brain wants to use your past, in order to try to protect you for the future, right? That's kind of like the mistake that we make where we get defensive in advance and our brain wants to predict it, like always on the lookout for triggers, right? It wants to always be aware, always be anxious about it, always be on high alert because it thinks that that's going to make you less likely to feel hurt, but it's not going to work because you can't feel your feelings in advance. So what I mean by that is when your brain thinks it always needs to be on the lookout and it wants to keep your past at the forefront of your mind, it's like, okay, this is really important. We need to remember that the last time that we went to the beach, we felt like this. Remember how we felt like this? We don't want to do that again. So we need to be on alert. We need to be looking for triggers so that we don't feel this way again. But then we end up creating negative emotion in anticipation of trying to avoid the negative emotion. It does not work. Our brain thinks that it's the thing that's going to protect us more, but it never does. Okay. The scary thing is when we learn how to let that go. It's one of the reasons why our brain doesn't want to do that. Our brain wants to be on high alert always because it thinks that if it doesn't, then it's somehow being naive or that it is going to be hurt worse later. And when you allow yourself space and you say, you know what, I might get hurt, it feels very vulnerable. And that's what our brain doesn't like. So that's why it always wants to do the bolo. It always wants to be on the lookout, and it wants to use your past to predict your future. Don't allow your brain to do this. This is your opportunity to be smarter than your brain, to be in charge of your brain, and to say, you know what, that did happen in my past, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen now. Okay? The third thing that you can do to handle triggering situations is don't deny the positive. Okay? I see this a lot. Our brain often wants to go to all or nothing. When we have a triggering situation come up, family event, date with the husband, work party for him, whatever it is, there's the triggering situation. Our brain wants to make it all or nothing. Either it's going to be amazing or it's going to be terrible. And our brain often wants to go to terrible, especially when it's a thing that brings up all of our insecurities, right? It's like, this is going to be terrible. I'm going to feel so insecure the whole night long. Our brain does that writing the script, predictive texting, and it does not allow for any positive emotion. So what I want to offer, ladies, is that you work on leaving space and allow the positive. Okay? Allow whatever comes up. Maybe there will be moments of insecurity, I don't know, but maybe there will also be moments of joy. And maybe if you allow it, there are going to be moments of fun and connection. But often when we go into these triggering situations, we write that ahead of time. We say, this is going to be terrible. And then that's all we allow ourselves to experience. We don't even allow ourselves to enjoy the beach trip with the husband because we're so worried about the times we might feel insecure or the time that we felt insecure when somebody walked by the beach that we saw and thought was attractive and then we felt insecure about it. Allow the 50-50. Allow the moments of negativity. Allow the feelings of insecurity. They're just feelings, but also leave space for the positive and give yourself permission to feel it. Don't deny the positive emotion. Allow it. Give yourself permission to enjoy it. Okay? And then the last thing that you can do that I want to talk about today is kind of what I alluded to earlier is, let me give you this, ladies, is that triggers only work when they have something to trigger. Okay? There is a reason that each one of you is thinking about certain scenarios in your brain, and they're probably similar but have little differences. Some of you are going to feel more insecure or triggered by attractive women. Some of you are very triggered by the clothing that other women wear. Some of you are very triggered by music. Some of you are very triggered by real people in real life. Some of you are very triggered by movies that you guys watch together or jokes that people tell. All of you guys have different triggers, and there's a reason that trigger is working for you or against you, however you say it, right? There's a reason that trigger is triggering you. It is triggering something inside of you. Now, if you are able to work through the things inside of you, then that trigger has nothing to trigger and it becomes powerless. The work of figuring out what it is triggering and overcoming those, that's what I do inside my coaching program. I can help you with that. That is an individual thing that I can help you with. So if you are looking for that, if you want to actually overcome, this is how I say you don't have to learn how to just handle triggers, but you can actually overcome them. Because if your trigger, which is just a circumstance, if that has nothing to trigger, it is powerless. It can't do anything to you, which is why I no longer am triggered when I go to the beach with my husband. It has nothing left to trigger because I have worked on it. What I realized is it was just bringing up my own physical insecurities, which is why it was so powerful for me. The most powerful work I've ever done is changing the things that I believe about myself and my body. Okay. And once I did that, once I actually changed what I believe, not just thought about it differently, not just tried to convince myself that I was fine, not just tried to put a Band-Aid on it, but actually did the work to change what I believe about myself, then that is when I changed how I felt about myself, which means that I no longer have those insecurities to trigger. You guys with me on this? Most life-changing thing ever, because now I go to the beach and I can enjoy it and I can sit there and I don't have to sit there and be triggered and be anxious the entire time worrying about my own insecurities because they are gone, ladies. Gone. I no longer hate my body. It's an amazing freedom. And that's why I'm going to teach that class at the end of this month. So if you guys want help with this, with these triggers, if you're having a lot of insecurities, a lot of issues with this, especially if they're physical, which most of our triggers are, then I want to encourage you to come join my coaching program so you can be with us in that class. Again, that will be the last week of June. So you can go to my website, joleneWynn.com, and you can go and sign up for my lifetime program, and you'll get access to all of our material, all of our coaching calls, but you'll also get access to that class so you can join us live. And then I'll be able to work with you during that week so that I can help you identify what those triggers are and figure out what those beliefs are, what those things are triggering, so that we can change them. And that's the work that can completely alter your life, because then you don't have to just handle triggers. You can actually remove them from your life. It's such a beautiful thing. So I just want to leave that with you there. And if you can't quite get there, if you can't quite believe that it's possible to live a life without triggers, then what I want to offer, this is something I teach my clients all the time, is you just let it sit there. If you have the thought like, yeah, that would never be possible for me, or there's no way that this could ever work, then I want you to just question it. I always say throw a wrench at it. I don't know where that saying comes from, but it's like you just question it for a minute. You just say, what if that's not true? What if it's actually possible to overcome triggers? And you just leave it there. And your brain might throw all the objections at it. And I just want you to just leave that question with your brain. What if it's actually possible? What if it's actually possible for me not to be triggered? What if it's actually possible for me to change how I feel about myself, to change what I believe about myself, to be in control in all situations rather than be powerless and at the effect of other triggers? What if I don't have to be triggered for the rest of my life? And you just let it sit there, because I promise you, you don't. And I want to teach you how. Thank you, ladies, for being here today. I love you guys so much, and I'm just so grateful for all of you. And I will talk to you next week on a brand new episode. So take care. Hello, my lady. I wrote a book, and I would love for you to read it. It's called The Not Enough Wife, and you can get it on Amazon today. This book is for any woman who has ever felt like she wasn't enough, not enough as a wife or as a mom, if she didn't have Instagram-worthy enough pictures, if she didn't throw Pinterest-worthy parties, if she ever felt like she was not enough. This is the book for her, and it's for you too. So go to Amazon today, go search up The Not Enough Wife by Jolene Wynn, and grab a copy for yourself and for all the women in your life. I hope you love it, and I can't wait to hear what you think.